Oh fuck. I logged out thinking that the OBS and the background will still run. By the way, that's the user has been deleted. Alright. Oh fucking hell, not again. Okay, this stuff.
And then we give it the name of the user that we want to delete. But be very careful here. When you run a command like this on a Linux system, the Linux system is going to make the assumption that you know what you're doing. So just make sure that you're typing the username that's actually the user you want to delete. Just be very careful. So we created a user earlier named Fox Mulder. I'm going to delete that user account. Maybe Mulder got abducted by aliens or something. I don't know. But we're going to remove him from the system. And that's
Alright.
it. Now that user didn't even have a home directory to begin with. But the thing is though, if that user did have a home directory, they would probably still have a home directory here because of the user delete command that doesn't delete the home directory for the user when you delete a user by default. Just keep that in mind. We'll return to that in a few minutes. But anyway, we can see here that that particular user account is gone. So let's go ahead and add that user back to the system, and at the same time make sure that a home directory is also created for that user when we create the user itself. And this is the command right here that we used earlier. So what I'm going to do is add the -m option. I'll press enter. No output, just like last time. But the difference, at least in my case, is that the user actually has a home directory right now. We see that right here. The line is wrapped a bit. You get the idea. That user does indeed have a home directory. We added the -m option, which is what you see here, that specifically tells UserAdd that we want a home directory when we create this user. So let's talk about removing the user again, but this time also removing the home directory. So let's want a option.
Okay, let's man this stuff. Okay, add user. It's downplaying itself, bro. Okay. Allow name that do not come. Man. Add user. Add manipulate user group. Okay, add user. Add X. Bro, I need a up to date one. I think. Okay. What the fuck is this? everything is in C.
Data. Inside the main function, we will call the BME280 config function. There are some examples provided in the datasheet.
Okay, I'm gonna watch this. But mm,
For example, for weather
that
monitoring, we can
the
use the
video was
forced
good, but
mode
it's
with
kind of
one
outdated,
sample.
I think. Okay, this is 17 minutes.
Now, let's look at how to create, delete, and modify local user accounts in Linux. Each person that needs to log in to our Linux server should have their own separate user account. This allows them to have personal files and directories protected by proper permissions. They also get to choose their own settings for whatever tools they use. And it also helps us as administrators. We can limit the privileges of each user to only what they require to do their job. This can sometimes reduce or prevent the damage when someone accidentally writes the wrong command, and it can help with the overall security of the system. It'll be up to us to manage these user accounts, which are sometimes simply called users. So let's dive right in and see how we create a new user on a Linux system. The command that lets us add a new user is intuitively called user add, and the simplest form we can use looks like this, where John can be replaced with whatever username we want to choose for this specific account. So after we run this command, the following things would happen. A new user called John is added to the system, and a new group also called John is automatically created. The group John will be set to be the primary group of the user John. A home directory is created for this account at /home/John, and this is where John can store his personal files and subdirectories plus his program settings. Their default shell will be set to be the program found at /bin/bash. Whenever John logs in, this is the application he'll be dropped into. Effectively, his entire login session will run inside this app. And all the files from etc will be copied to the user's home directory.
Low level, more advanced. What? Okay. Not this. Pause this.
Hello and welcome to your third video in an introduction.
Okay, don't need that.
Option, which is what you see here, that specifically tells UserAdd that we want a home directory when we create this user. So that we want
Okay. This is mine around, so there ain't nothing. So like, add user Eric. Eric is just a name I thought of. It's sudo permission. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, user ads. Sorry about that. No. Okay, I don't know how to quit this. Close. Sudo add user. Cat slash home cd slash home ls. Okay, Eric. Okay.
a home directory when we create this user. So let's talk about
It's one, bro. What the fuck am I even doing? user delete in the user sudo user delete Eric clear password. Okay. User add home. No. Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
Removing the user again, but this time also removing the home directory as well. And again, we see that user does indeed have a home directory. And earlier, when we removed this account the first time, this is the command that we used right here. So to remove a home directory, we add the -r option to this command. That's going to, like I mentioned, remove the user account and also their home directory. Now, before I actually press enter here, I do want to mention that before you start removing a home directory for a user, for example, if you are working at a company, you'll want to make sure that you should remove their home directory before you actually do it. For example, if an employee leaves the company, that employee's supervisor might need access to their files in order to finish any projects that they might have been working on. But if you delete their files, well, they can't do that. Perhaps more importantly, a lot of companies out there, they have requirements for how long to retain their employees' data. And if you're actually working in a company, it's extremely important that you ask HR or whoever it is you ask there what the retention policy is for employee data. You'll want to make sure that you are in compliance with any policies that might exist. Maybe a company might have a policy where they have to retain user records for a few years. And if you delete a user account with their home directory, then you are not in compliance. Now, if your company does not have a policy when it comes to user data retention or data retention in general, it's
एक चम्चा भए पुगिहाल्छ नि
एक चम्चा मात्रै
नयाँ विम लिक्विडमा कागतीको शक्ति छ त्यसैले एक चम्चा विम सबै भाँडा हुन्छ क्लिन
It's actually one of those things that should definitely be drafted. Let somebody know. Anyway, I'm going to press enter. We can ignore this message right here about the mail spool. That's beyond the scope of this video. That is a normal message though, so nothing to be concerned with. And we can check the contents of the home directory again, and that home directory is in fact gone.
Um, Okay.
Another thing that I want to show you guys is how to set a password for a user, because when we added the Foxmolder user, it didn't even ask us what we wanted the password to be for that user. In fact, the user had no password at all. Now what I'm going to do is just add the user back to the system. I'm going to add it with the home directory. So nothing different. I'll just press enter. User has a home directory and the user is on the system. So let's take a look at how we set a password for the user. And to set a password for a user, or even change our own password for that matter, we have a dedicated command, the passwd.
Oh, fuck.
Command. Now, if I entered this by itself right now, it's going to assume that I want to change the password for the user that I'm currently logged in with. So if you had a user, for example, that came to you and said, how do I change my password? You would ask them to run the passwd command. You don't even need to get involved. They can change their own password. There's nothing for you as the administrator to do in this regard, other than to know that the passwd command exists. And I'm going to actually use it right now. I'm going to make it fail on purpose though. And the reason why is because I don't want to change my password right now. But the first thing that it does is it asks you for your current password, which I've entered. And then it asks you for your new password. What do you want your new password to be? Which I've entered. And then you enter it again. And it's telling me that the passwords don't match, and that was intentional. If the passwords did match, then the password I chose right then and there would become my password. So that's how you change the password for the user that you're logged in with. But actually, I brought that up in regards to setting a password for another user. So for example, if you have someone that's going to start logging into your Linux server, you could set a temporary password for them and then ask them to change it. In a future video, we'll be going over password expiration, but we're going to omit that right now just to keep things simple. So to change a password for another user, you can type sudo, because in order to change a password for another user, you do need root privileges or at least access to sudo in order to be able to do that. Then you can run passwd, and then the name of the user that you want to change the password for, or in this case, you want to set the password. So I'll type the name of the user right here. Now notice that it didn't ask me for the user's current password. You might think that the reason why it didn't ask me was because the user didn't even have a password. We didn't even set a password. But if you have access to sudo or the root user, it's never going to ask you for the user's current password. I mean, root is pretty much like God mode, if you've ever played Doom, for example. It's the all-powerful account that can do basically everything. So root doesn't need to know the password of a password. Then you can run passwd, and then the name of the user that you want to change the password for, or in this case, you want to set the password. So I'll type the name of the user right here. Now notice that it didn't ask me for the user's current password. You might think that the reason why it didn't ask me was because the user didn't even have a password. We didn't even set a password. But if you have access to sudo or the root user, it's never going to ask you for the user's current password. I mean, root is pretty much like God mode, if you've ever played Doom, for example. It's the all-powerful account that can do basically everything. So root doesn't need to know the password of the user to change or set the password. So even if the user already had a password, it doesn't care. You're setting the password, and anyone that has access to root has permission to set a password for another user. So I'm going to type it in right now. And again. And it said password updated successfully. So I was able to add a password for the FoxMolder user. Now let's go ahead and see an example of creating a system user. A system user is very useful when you are doing any kind of automation. For example, maybe you have an accounting department and you need to run a financial report for them every week. That sounds tedious to me, and to be honest with you, doing a financial report, that doesn't really excite me. And if you're like me, you'll probably want to automate that report, so you'll never be bothered to do it. But if you're going to automate something like a process or some sort of task, then it makes sense to not use your user account for it. Create a system user. And actually, you can use a system user with cron to run a scheduled job, which is the best way to do it. Now, I'll be covering cron in a future video in this series. Go ahead and check the playlist to see if it's already there. But for now, just keep in mind that system users are useful when you want something to run in the background, and it's not something that's associated to any one person. So let's go ahead and add a system user right now. So again, it's sudo and then user add. And we're going to use -r. And that -r option actually allows us to designate that we want to create a system user specifically, not a normal user. And what I'm going to do is call the system user sysuser. Just like that. I'll press enter. And what I'm going to do is cat the contents of etc password again. And I'm going to grep for sysuser because I only want to see that one line. And we see it right here.
साथियों गाउन भने जिन्दगी भर रिग्रेट गर्नेछु Mountain Dew डोरको अगाडि.
Now notice that the UID is 998. It doesn't start with. So let's go ahead and add a system user right now. So again, it's sudo and then user add. And we're going to use -r. And that -r option actually allows us to designate that we want to create a system user specifically, not a normal user. And what I'm going to do is call the system user sysuser. Just like that. I'll press enter. And what I'm going to do is cat the contents of etc password again. Useful when you want something to run in the background, and it's not something that's associated to any one person. So let's go ahead and add a system user right now. So again, it's sudo and then user add. And we're going to use -r. And that -r option actually allows us to designate that we want to create a system user specifically, not a normal user. And what I'm going to do is call the system user sysuser. Just like that. I'll press enter. Here. Now notice that the UID is 998. It doesn't start with 1000. Earlier, when we created a user, that user was assigned UID 1001. But this user was actually assigned a UID of less than 1000. And that's generally the case. Normal user accounts will be provided a UID of 1000 or greater. And then system users will generally be provided a UID of less than 1000. And that distinction doesn't really matter so much other than you can deduce that a user is most likely a system user based on the UID. In my case, I'm using a desktop distribution of Linux, and most of the time, desktop distributions will not show a system user on the login screen. Now that does vary from one distribution to another, but generally speaking, most distributions will not show UIDs on the login screen that are under 1000. And that's important because if it did show UIDs that are under 1000, then in my case, there would be probably around 44 user accounts shown on the login screen, and that's very messy. But anyway, at this point, I just want you to be aware of the -R option, and just keep in mind that that allows you to create a system user, and a system user, again, is a user that generally doesn't log in interactively and is used for things that are going to run in the background. That allows you to exist, and that you're aware of what its purpose is. Its purpose is to contain a users will generally be provided a UID of less than 1,000. Show UIDs on the login screen. Around 44 user accounts shown on the login screen, and that's very messy. But anyway, at this point, I just want you to be aware of the -R option, and just keep in mind that that allows you to create a system user, and a system user, again, is a user that generally doesn't log in interactively and is used for things that are going to run in the background, schedule tasks, processes, things like that. Now, that actually completes the main part of this video. The whole goal was to show you the basics of user management, and I've already showed you how to add a user, how to remove a user, and some options with the user add command. Now, of course, you could just type man and then user add, and then you get a bunch of options here as far as some of the additional things that you can do with that command. But as far as the basics are concerned, which was the actual purpose of this entire video, we're covered there. But I'm not going to end the video just yet. There's one more thing that I want to show you guys. And as I promised earlier in the video, I told you that I would go over the contents of the Etsy password file to help you guys understand it better. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Now, as you recall, the Etsy password file, that contains a listing of all the users on the system. There's quite a few lines there. So what I'm going to do is lower the font size a bit, just to make sure you can see everything. Hopefully that's not too small. We have several different columns on each line, and each column is separated by a colon. Now the first column is the username. No surprise there. The second column, which is this one right here, that just refers to the password. Actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it essentially means that we have an encrypted password in use here. And nowadays, we don't really use any other kind of password. We always use hashed passwords, which is what this refers to. It just means that the password for this user is hashed. It's not shown here. In some ways, that's a carryover from the olden days, which is why I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. But you'll probably almost, if not always, see an X in that field. Continuing, we have the UID right here, as I talked about earlier. The next field is the group ID. I've already explained what a UID is earlier in the video, and a GID or group ID is essentially the same thing, but for groups. I'll be covering groups in a separate video, so don't worry about that right now. This field here, that is the user information field, and you might see that referred to as the Geckos field, G-E-C-O-S, so it looks like that. But I like to refer to it as the user information field, and it's most commonly used for the first and last name, as you see here. That user information field is completely optional. It's perfectly fine to go ahead and skip it, and you'll actually see it skipped in other user accounts and other lines. You'll see like 2 colons together. That just means that that information isn't there. It's blank. Continuing on, we have the home directory for the user, in my case, /home/J. That's where my home directory is. So it's essentially telling the Linux system where to find the home directory for that user. The last column here, that refers to the shell that is designated for that user. When a user logs in, their shell is activated. In my case, /bin/bash. That's the shell that I'm going to be using when I log in. So for example, if I type echo, then $, and then shell in all caps, you can see that my shell is /bin/bash. And that was set right here. And again, this is the shell that's going to start up as soon as I log in. Now you will see other things here instead of /bin/sh or bin bash. For example, user sbin no login. And you'll see other variations of this as well. User sbin no login means, well, that user's not going to be able to log in. And when it comes to system users, we really don't want them to log in. And generally speaking, system users are not associated to a human being, so there's no reason for them to interactively log in, and they don't have to log in order to run reports, run commands, scripts, or anything like that. Often people will use system accounts to automate things, like I mentioned earlier, and that's essentially all this is. User SBIN no login means basically what it says. When that user tries to log in, even if you did set a password for that user, they'll be denied. It's going to attempt to run user SBIN no login, which is basically going to deny the login. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the etc shadow file. Now, real quick, you'll recall that I mentioned that we have an X right here for most, if not all, the users, and that X refers to the fact that that user has a hashed password. It's almost always going to be the case. We really don't want to store the user's password in plain text in the etc password file. We would rather hash it and store it somewhere else. So if we take a look at the etc shadow file, now, as an aside, you will need sudo in order to view this file, unlike the etc password file. As you can see, I was able to run cat etc password with no sudo at all, but I can't get away with that when it comes to etc shadow, so I will add sudo. Now, just like with the etc password file, with the etc shadow file, we have a bunch of different columns on each line, and each column is separated by a single colon. On the left, we have the username, and that's the username right here. And to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to grep for my user account here, just to get it down to one line. Makes it a little bit easier. But in the first column, again, we have the username. In the second column, which is actually ridiculously long, we have the actual hash for the password. Now, this isn't my actual password, it's just a hash of my password. That's an important distinction. So moving on, we have this field right here, and that number refers to the number of days since the Unix epoch that the password was last changed. For those that aren't already aware, the Unix epoch is January 1st of 1970. Therefore, we can read that column as the password having last been changed that many days after the Unix epoch. So in this case, 18,807 days. The fourth column tells us how many days are required to pass before the user will be able to change their password again. In this example, the user can change their password, well, anytime. And they can do that because the number of days is set to 0. 0 means anytime. This column right here refers to how many days until a password change is required. In this case, 99,999 days since the Unix epoch will pass until I'm required to change my password. I'm probably
/home/John, and you can explore it with ls-a/etc/ just pass this option. A home directory with a command like this, where it's short form on the second line. Now, coming back to our user add command, if we're not happy with the defaults, we could choose a different shell and a home directory with a command like this, where it's short form on the second line. Of course, if we only want to choose a different shell, but keep the default location for the home directory, we can just pass this option. These account details, such as usernames, user IDs, group IDs, preferred shells, home directories, etc., are stored in the file at etc password, and we can see them if we type cat etc password. So we'll see a line that looks like this. The first number, 1001, is the ID number associated with John's username. The next 1001 is the numeric ID of its primary group, also called John in this case. Then we can see the home directory and the preferred login shell. User add will automatically select a proper numeric ID from the available IDs, and it'll be incrementally done just by adding 1 to the last one. So for the first user, the ID will be 1000. For the next one, it'll be 1001, and so on. If we want to manually select a different ID, we can use a command like this, where it's equivalent short form. The user Smith will have the numeric ID 1100, but also the group called Smith will get a numeric ID of 1100. If we want to see what username and group owns files or directories, we can do so with the usual ls-l. In this case, we'll use the home group, or home folder rather. But if we want to see the numeric IDs of the user and group owners, we can add the -n for numeric option, and they'll be shown to us. It might also be useful sometimes to find out more about the users we're currently logged in as. We can see the username we're logged in as, plus groups we're
Wait. It's way too late, and I fucking realize how dumb I am by generating a fucking hmm, fucking roadmap. I thought this would teach me AWS for Linux. No, Linux for AWS and Bash for AWS. Instead, it taught me only Linux, only Bash, which ain't related to AWS most of the time. Like this shit ain't for mostly for AWS. Oh fucking hell! It's not a waste, but still, it's kind of like, bruh. Okay, so this is the roadmap I'm gonna use. So like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. But okay, all right. It's way too late. In reality, it's 1 a.m. So like, I gotta go and sleep. So goodbye. I will copy this and paste this in the description for reminder for me. So goodbye. This will be 32.5. I fucking logged out in the last video, I think then. Okay, goodbye. Goodbye. This is Linux bits. I can do anything. Ding 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 What you talking about, bitch? What you talking about? Okay, goodbye.